So, Devin Gordon, I brought you back in studio. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
I wanted to kick off Super Bowl week with a very specific story that only you, Devin, can tell.
Yes, that I do agree with you. That for this once, only me. I do really think that might be true. Yeah.
In a nation that is obsessed with firsts, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first person to do this ever. As we sit on the precipice of Super Bowl 58, it has occurred to me that I don't know jack shit about Super Bowl I. And that makes me quite unlike you.
Yeah. This is the one reason why I'm the only one on the list for this story. I know way too much about Super Bowl I and have since I was about 8 years old.
Why?
There are two ways to answer that question. If you're my therapist, I would say something about being like a latchkey kid and, a dearth of male role models in my life, that sort of thing. But the sports reason is because the helmets were really cool. And getting obsessed with football. The first book I ever wrote was a crayon illustrated guide to all of the Super Bowls thus far. We were on Super Bowl 19, I think, when I wrote it.
Just to state perhaps the obvious, and apologies to your therapist, you might have to deal with this later. You're a pretty weird kid.
Yes. I mean, I wrote a crayon book of the illustrated history of the Super Bowl. Most kids don't do that.
No.
I just got obsessed with it. So I knew a little bit about the first Super Bowl, and it always seemed like this amazing thing because by the time I was a kid, it was massive. It was the biggest thing in the world.
But when I think about what the Super Bowl is now, which is as much about pop culture and halftime and music as anything. Well, I imagine in my brain that 1967 Super Bowl I halftime was, I don't know, old-timey?
There was marching bands and things like that. But there was also jetpacks. I have wanted a jetpack my whole life. I still don't have one. And apparently they had them at halftime of the first Super Bowl.
That part already mind-blowing.
That part worked. Which is a study in contrast.
They survived, by the way, at the end of that clip.
Which is a study in contrast to most of the things that happened around the first Super Bowl. I mean, this thing was a shit show. A clusterfuck. There are so many curse words you can describe to what this game was on the ground that is somewhat fitting, definitely amazing that the biggest sporting event, the one national holiday we all share, began with really a disaster. I mean, this thing could have gone off the rails so many times in so many ways, not least with a detonating jetpack above LA Coliseum and 2 dead spacemen, right? That could have happened. And it honestly wasn't the only mass slaughter event that the Super Bowl I narrowly avoided. That's how crazy this was.
How were others in danger at Super Bowl I?
So there was a giant wrought iron clock in the far end zone at the LA Coliseum. And during the entire week leading up to the Super Bowl, the plan for the network broadcast was their big innovation was going to be an on-screen game clock. This did not exist. When you were watching football, you had no idea how much time was left in the quarter, in the game, anything. They decided it'd be a good idea to change that. But that required attaching sort of a electronic device to the back of one of the clock's hands, which they tested all week, got it perfect, and then for the opening kickoff, when they went to flip it on, it malfunctioned. The clock hand broke off, plummeted downward into the stands, and the only reason Super Bowl I isn't remembered for some kind of Final Destination-style bloodbath is because there was no one in those seats below, because the game was not even close to being sold out. It was a television innovation that they were trying to debut for the first time, the first down line when that was a thing.
Right. So this brings me to the way in which all of us are going to consume this thing, which is from our living rooms, right? We're not going to be at the game itself. We'll be watching what now has become the paragon of broadcast cultural institutions, right? The telecast of a Super Bowl.
The made-for-television event to end all made-for-television events, yes.
And so in 1967 for Super Bowl I, what did this look like from America's living rooms?
Yeah, see, that's the thing. After Super Bowl I ended, and Super Bowl I was carried on 2 networks, NBC and CBS, which is one of the reasons they had 50 million people watching it. There were only 3 channels, so you didn't have that many choices.
So it's simulcast.
Simulcast on 2 networks, NFL.
Also unthinkable.
Also unthinkable. So the game ends, and almost immediately, both networks tape over the first Super Bowl because that's what you did with everything in those days. First, film was expensive. No one was archiving sports because it didn't occur to anyone that this would be something you might want to preserve. So, within days of Super Bowl I ending, Super Bowl I vanished.
If you can believe this, they recorded soap operas over the game tapes, and VCRs hadn't been invented yet.
Because of the high cost of videotape in the 1960s, it was network policy to reuse old stock. Neither CBS nor NBC owns a full Super Bowl I broadcast.
Yeah, I just like how the NFL and the networks in this case just were like that dad who accidentally tapes over his daughter's, ballet recital.
The fact that you can't watch Super Bowl I because the networks themselves taped up 2 networks, not just one,
right.
2. That's like
2 terrible parents.
That's like 2 different people smashing one tablet of the 10 Commandments, right? Like, it's crazy that this happened. So in 2005, Sports Illustrated publishes a story called The 25 Greatest Lost Treasures of Sports. And it's things like Honus Wagner's baseball card, the chunk of Evander Holyfield's ear that Mike Tyson bit off that one time, and a broadcast copy of either NBC or CBS of Super Bowl I.
The broadcast copy, though, explain what that means, because we just watched the jetpacks. Like, what's missing here, really?
Yeah, so there's like little bits online. You can see bits of the halftime show. You can see bits of the game. The NFL Films was there. They were gathering stuff for their own. It's much more primitive than what you would have seen on the broadcasts. And what you can't see is what the world saw, what 50 million people watched that day. And now there's a $1 million bounty on it. And, there's tape heads and, the world.
Yeah,
this is the internet
like
rabbit hole. Yes, people are going to go for it now.
We want to know what we as Americans would have seen in the way that we all gather around the Super Bowl in, again, the lone collective ritual that we engage in today. What was that like when it first was born?
Yeah.
And so I'm imagining now this national treasure sort of a hunt, right? There's a bounty of sorts, $1 million. And so where is that hunt today? How is that search going?
10 years later, by this point, we're deep into the internet era, right? If it hasn't shown up yet, either it doesn't exist or there's a really good reason why. And I think the it doesn't exist camp is winning, right? It's been close to half a century.
Because people didn't have VCRs.
No VCRs.
How do you
It's not like you could point a home video camera at the television and record that.
Right.
There's only a handful of ways this could possibly exist. Except that 10 years later, around 2015, out of thin air, a copy of Super Bowl I, the CBS broadcast, miraculously resurfaces.
And your reaction, I can only imagine.
I got to go see this thing. I've been waiting way too long, 30-ish, let's call it, years. It exists. It can be done. I can see this. Of course I can see it. Why wouldn't I be able to see it? Why can't the world see it? I couldn't see it. I spent years trying to get permission from the one person, the wizard behind the curtain, who holds the key to Super Bowl I. And I tried, and he didn't answer. I just assumed my life would end in failure not having seen Super Bowl I.
But the reason, Devin Gordon, you are sitting across from me here today is because what?
I finally got the call.